Hello, this is Stephen Whitfield, a drilling contractor, here outside of a test rig at NOV's Springett Technology Center in Navasota, Texas. Now behind me is the driller's cabin. For those of you familiar with the design of a land rig, this driller's cabin is in an unusual place, on the ground, not on the rig floor. NOV has made this move as part of its efforts to bring people further away from harm's way on the rig floor, as it incorporates more automation systems onto the rig workflow. Now here at the rig, we spoke with some representatives from NOV about what this move means for the role of the driller and the rig crew on the rig floor, and where they see the designs of rigs moving forward as more of these automation tools become part of the workflow.
On March 8th, NOV removed the driller's cabin off the floor of its test rig in Navasota, installing it on the ground next to the rig. The move was done, in part, to highlight the company's automation and robotic systems, which it says can minimize the need for rig crews to handle hazardous equipment in the red zone, as well as the need for drillers to maintain a physical line of sight with that equipment. We spoke with Chuck Wright, R&D Strategy Manager at NOV, about how the removal of the driller's cabin from the rig floor fits in with the company's overall vision of automation, as well as the impact that moving the cabin to the ground could have on future rig design.
So what we're doing is we're providing a visual of where automation is going to be going for the drilling industry. The driller's cabin is something that's typically been on a rig floor, so we're trying to give the visual that it doesn't have to be there. Well, some of the things we're using is systems that are already in place. So when you're talking about vision systems and safety systems, there's already an existing suite of technologies that you can incorporate. And then we're also looking at incorporating robotic systems into the processes, but keeping those processes native to what the rig already does and how the rig does it. And I think that's a key aspect in bringing the technology adoption into the industry.
So what are some of the challenges when you're physically removing the driller's cabin from the rig floor, putting it on the ground? You know, I'm sure that there are some design challenges. I'm sure that there are some just technical challenges with doing that. What have you seen?
Sure. So one of the first things that comes to mind is if you take the cabin off of the floor on a rig that has a design for a certain amount of weight hanging off, you have to compensate for that same amount of weight, which you wouldn't normally think about.
What kind of benefits do you see for potentially with future rig design when you're getting rid of the driller's cabin from the rig floor, putting it on the ground? What do you do with the space that you have?
Well, that's one of the interesting things, is that if you don't have to design the system with humans necessarily directly in the loop, it opens up the design to something else. A perfect example, if you look at where vacuum cleaners are today with the Roomba, it doesn't look like a vacuum cleaner anymore. Sure, there's certain systems that stay the same, but it's a completely different form factor that allows for a variety of different design concepts that aren't there because those systems don't have to be there that are there today.
So as we're moving closer and closer to full automation, I mean, we're talking about the manless rig floor, we're talking about sort of more automation on the rig. I think the question that would come to mind for me is, what role does the driller have in an increasingly automated system? And conversely, what role does the rig crew have in a system like this?
Well, for any automation system, if you look at automation, is not new to the drilling industry. A brake handle with a chain is a form of automation. The driller is still in the loop, just like in process systems and petrochemical and other industry of the world, is that you still have someone looking after a system. Is the system acting correctly? For the same thing with the crew is, if a system doesn't act correctly, you still need people to be able to recover a system, to work on the system. So the roles change, but the knowledge still has to be there in how to operate the system. And it becomes also a societal question. Are you willing to step into a car that has no dashboard, no steering wheel, no driver, and trust today that the car would go down I-45, go downtown Houston with all the other crazy drivers that are still driving? And that is an answer the industry hasn't quite come to. It's the same thing you get on a plane. Are you willing to go on a plane that can today take off and land by itself, but it has no cockpit and no way to get to the cockpit? That answer is a little bit more difficult. So as it stands today, those roles still stay the same or change slightly. Automation just helps enable a consistency.
I want to talk a little bit about communications and when you're physically moving the driller's cabin away from the rig floor and down to the ground, you have to deal with sort of longer cables. And I'm sure with that, you're talking about potential latency issues. As you're doing this, as you're sort of designing this, what challenges do you face with latency, with communications? Is there an acceptable level of latency that you find with a given communication with the system, or what are you seeing there?
So that's a really good question, and it's one of the reasons why you really need a visual for one, and then actually do it and root out those problems, right? Like the concept of the weight. You wouldn't think at first that you would need to do anything by removing the cabin. The control system is the same way. If you have a system that is not loaded very well on the control system, meaning it has an easy job, it may not be a problem. But as you get to the more complicated pieces of equipment that have a lot more calculations going back and forth, it could be an issue. And that's why you actually need to physically do it, create the longer cables, and then to root out those problems. It's just a matter of actually accomplishing the task and then putting them to the engineering groups to solve.
So we're in this cabin with a lot of screens, a lot of screens for everybody. As we go into sort of a manless rig floor, more automated system, how does that sort of affect the visuals that the driller is seeing? Are we going to see more screens? Are we going to see fewer screens? What changes there?
It's kind of a funny question because it could involve both, where you will need more screens in the sense that now that you don't have the eyeball vision of direct path, you have to have alternate vision. But that doesn't mean that other screens can't be consolidated into screens. And that's another reason to actually take the step, remove the cabin, and yes, you can do it from a simulation aspect, but actually taking it to a rig with operations in its normal native environment always highlights things that you can't see in a lab. And that's exactly some of the things that NOV is looking at, is finding what can be consolidated, what extra things to make it an efficient system.
Caleb Malinar, test tech supervisor at NOV, discussed the impact that moving the driller's cabin to the ground could have on the work of the driller and the work of the rig crew. He acknowledged that working in the new location has been a bit of an adjustment for him, but he was optimistic about what a relocated cabin and the overall shift towards automation on the rig could mean for personnel.
I'm definitely losing a lot of what I'm used to feeling up there. I mean, there's no more vibration. It's a lot of stillness. And having to adjust to that, I haven't really got a chance to run the rig yet. We're still under a lot of commissioning, but I think that's going to be something that we dive into slowly and we just work through. But as far as visual perception, I'm getting a few blind spots here and there, but I don't think it's anything we can't work past. Well, we're definitely relying more on the Aura system camera. I have my CCTV cameras. I'm able to see everything I need to be at certain stage points. So I'm fully trusting in that. And also Amphion as well. All my parameters in check, make sure all my set points are correct. And I just let it run.
How does having this cabin on the ground affect how you manage your rig crews? How does it affect how you do your job?
I don't think it's going to affect it too much. With the cabin on the ground, moving more and more towards automation, it's obviously a lot safer. We're getting people away from well center, away from underneath the top drive coming down. Nobody's working in the board anymore. I think it gives them an opportunity to focus more on other equipment around the rig and dive into a stronger preventative maintenance program to where we can eliminate downtime.
Okay, so this is a big design change to have the driller's cabin on the ground instead of the rig floor, and it sort of opens up a whole lot of possibilities. You as a driller, where do you think this sort of affects the designs of the rigs, and how does that change in design affect what you guys do? Like, what do you think is the best use of the space that you now have on the floor?
As far as space, I'm not sure. You can always put more equipment somewhere. More space is better just to have it, or to have it and not need it is always better. But as far as eliminating structures that we're not having to utilize anymore, that'll save time in rig moves. For the robots being on the floor, you don't have to worry about guys getting tired. You'll see a lot more consistency. You don't have to worry about guys needing a lunch break or getting thirsty or falling out from the heat or the cold winter days. All this right here, this is going to be a huge change for this industry.
Mr. Wright said that NOV is currently evaluating how this shift in location for the driller's cabin will impact driller and rig crew operations in advance of a demonstration that it will hold at its Navasota facility during the Offshore Technology Conference in May.
What NOV at the heart wants to show is, one, the visual that the systems that we see on a rig can radically change from where they are today. And we'd like to showcase that in a variety of technologies, just as a concept that even if everything doesn't work perfectly today, it's very close to where it needs to be with an effort. It looks different on different style rigs. An offshore application looks radically different than a land rig, but the concept of a rig where people are not in the zone is something that can happen in the industry with a little effort, and that's what we're trying to showcase at OTC.
From NOV's Springett Technology Center in Navasota, Texas, this is Stephen Whitfield. Thank you for visiting Drilling Contractor. Please make sure to check in with us as we follow up with NOV on their steps to further prove this automation project.